Chapter 7. That night, Tio slept like shit. He thought the fancy bed would be like sleeping on a cloud, but it was too soft, too different. He spent hours tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable. The room was also way too quiet. He was used to the constant hum of Quetzalcoatl drifting in through his open window every night. Here, the silence pressed against his ears. Too soon, a light rapping on the door woke him from his fitful sleep. A soul priest stuck his head in, informing him that breakfast was ready. Tio spent a long time in the shower, letting the hot water relax the tension in his wings. In a bleary-eyed haze, he put on his binder and stumbled down the hall. When Tio walked into the dining room, he found Nia sitting at the long table, swiping the last big of egg yolk from one of her two finished plates with a torn-off piece of tortilla. "Good morning," she said, jumping up from her chair. "Is there coffee?" Tio asked, squinting at the buffet maize and pan dulce had laid out. "Loads! And Dulce snuck us out some sugar to add," Nia said, crossing to Tio with a few long strides. She stopped and gave him a once-over. "Wait, why aren't you in your gear?" Tio rubbed his fist against his eyes. "What gear?" He realized Nia was dressed already. Her dark hair was in her usual braids, but her outfit made him pause. It was like some high-tech, futuristic athletic wear you'd see in a magazine. She had tight leggings and a compression sports bra. The material was black, but Tio could make out a subtle honeycomb pattern to it. Panels of gold material and mesh crossed her thighs and accented her top. Sol's sunburst was embroidered with gold thread on Nia's upper left chest, and the mountain glyph of her home city, La Combre, was stitched inside the sun. "What are you wearing?" Tio asked, suddenly much more awake. Nia's expression shifted from amused confusion to dreadful realization. "These are our training uniforms from the academy." "Our?" Tio looked past Nia to find Xochi, Otzi, Marino, and Desi sitting at the table eating. They all wore clothes similar to Nia's with slight variations. Meanwhile, Tio was standing there in his pajamas. Someone laughed, and Tio turned to see Ocello, Aurelio, and Aristella walk in. Ocello had a wide, mean smirk on their face. Aristella laughed behind her hand and nudged her brother, but Aurelio didn't react. Silently, he looked Tio up and down, scowling. The war semidiose stood between the twins, comically short in comparison, in a training uniform that left their arms and legs bare. Aurelio and Aristella were in the same matching outfits they'd been wearing at the fire in Quetzalcoatl, leggings, shorts, and sleeveless tops that left their midriffs bare. Aurelio's gold cuffs were still large around his forearms, the strange three-finger gloves on his hands. The thin material of his uniform clung to his chest and thighs, hugging every muscular curve and leaving very little to the imagination. It was fucked up that he was such a jerk and still looked that hot in dress training clothes. Where are your clothes?" Aurelio suddenly asked, that damn frown back on his face. Tio was about to ask what the hell that meant when Estella let out an ugly laugh. "Yeah, are you really going to compete in sweats?" Tio's hands clenched into fists, embarrassment a hot slap on the back of his neck. Without warning, Nia lurched toward Ocello. They stumbled back, startled. Nia exhaled from through her nose and crossed her arms. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Now it was Tio's turn to laugh. He looked back to Aurelio, but he was glaring down at the breakfast table like he was about to light it on fire. Ocello's sudden expression quickly contorted into a snarl. "What's all this?" Diosa Luna had walked into the dining room from the kitchen. Her dark eyes cut among them. "Is there a problem?" she asked, even and calm. Tio straightened and cleared his throat while the other four also gathered themselves to look as innocent as possible. "No, Diosa," Ocello said gruffly, like it physically pained them to hold their tongue. They all knew good and well not to evoke the wrath of Luna. After another moment of scrutiny, she nodded. "Tio, come with me. We have your uniform waiting for you," Luna said, motioning for him to follow her. "Tio just finished his own fitting." Tio followed her back into the hall, making a point to keep his chin held high. Diosa Luna brought him into a room where a small group of soul priests were waiting. A circular dais was in the center with a set of 3 mirrors and a rack of clothes. "We made your uniform like the students of the academy receive. We didn't know your preferences, and we were a bit crunched for time, so we had to use our best judgment," Luna said, pulling his shirt off a hanger and giving it to Tio. Tio ran his fingers over the short-sleeved shirt, giving a closer look at the honeycomb pattern in the light. Instead of gold accents like Nia's, these accent panels were jade green. "This seems really fancy," he murmured, noting the Quetzalcoatl glyph stitched into the sun with matching green thread. "It's the latest in performance wear," Luna agreed. "Moisture-wicking and tear-resistant. These will hold up to damage if embedded in your semidiosis skin." "Damage?" Tio repeated, cutting Luna a nervous glance. She gave him a patient smile. "These are the Sunbearer trials." Tio did his best to ignore the heavy weight that dropped into his stomach. He didn't want to think about what possible outfit-tearing scenarios lay ahead of him. Running his hand over the back of the shirt, he found 2 vertical slits. "What are these for?" he asked, sliding his fingers to the gaps. "Each uniform has special accommodations depending on the semidiosis talents. Some are flame retardant, others have extra stretch," she explained, Those are for your wings. My wings? Tio shook his head and tried to hand the shirt back. I don't use my wings. Luna's eyebrows pinched. You'll need them for the trials. No, I won't, Tio insisted. I can do it without them. Luna gave him a look that rivaled Humac's long-suffering exasperation, but Tio wouldn't back down. Then don't use them, but you still need to wear the uniform, she said, ignoring Tio's outstretched hand. The material has enough give that they should fit fine underneath. Tio was tempted to argue that he needed a whole new shirt, but he didn't want to press his luck with the diosa. Fine, he agreed, albeit tersely. With some help from the priest, Tio changed and managed to wrangle his wings under the shirt with the help of his binder. He stood in front of the mirrors, examining himself and feeling absolutely ridiculous. The clothes were so tight, he felt completely exposed. They'd given him a pair of shorts, thank Soul, but they were tiny, and every time he tried to pull them down toward his knee, they sprang back up to the middle of his thigh. The doors flew open and in strode Chisme and Verdad. Who's up next? Chisme asked as his two assistants filed in behind him. When they spotted Tio, they hefted their large cameras and started snapping pictures. Tio threw his hands up, clenching his light stance in front of his eyes. What's he doing here? He asked Luna, scowling. The last thing he wanted right now was an audience. We need promotional photos of all the competitors in the uniforms, Luna explained. We just finished up with your creepy little friend, Chisme said through a smile. Today he'd exchanged his red outfit for an obnoxiously bright orange one and matching lipstick. Another Jade, Verdad said, jotting down notes while wearing a practical pantsuit. 2 Jade competitors for the very first time. She glanced up at Tio through her glasses. I love a first-person perspective on what that might mean. Tio ignored both of them. I don't want my picture taken. Teenagers, always so self-conscious, Chisme mused. You're not used to being in the spotlight, are you? Verdad asked. To Luna's credit, she did at least seem sympathetic to Tio's pleading look, but it was no use. I'm afraid it's part of the gig, she said. Tio groaned and tipped his head back. Fine. He stepped back onto the dais and scowled at Chisme. Just want to get it over with. The feeling is quite mutual, Chisme assured him. Verdad stepped forward. I would love to sit down with you, Tio. Maybe we could... No, Tio snapped. He stood there while Chisme barked orders and his assistants took rapid-fire pictures. He didn't know what to do or how to stand. He couldn't even figure out where to put his hands before Chisme said they were finished. I think that's the best we're going to get, he said as he checked the camera roll. He waved Tio off without even looking up. You can go back to being angry with the world now. Tio, really, Verdad tried again. Tio stomped out of the room, hoping he'd never have to see those pictures for himself. When he got back to the dining room, most of the girls were sitting at one table at the end of the table and talking, not even bothering to look up when he entered. Aurelio watched Tio take the seat on the other side of Nia from Zio, and Tio did his best to ignore him. The younger boy had on a similar uniform to his, but he had a lightweight jacket on top. Looking sharp, Nia grinned as Tio plopped into the seat next to her. I feel ridiculous, he grumbled, tugging the high collar of the shirt. How did you get a jacket? Zio shrugged as he strewed a pineapple spear dusted with tahine. I asked for one. Felt kind of naked otherwise. Tio huffed. Well, shit, why didn't I think of that? Nia laughed and thumped him hard on the back. You get used to it. Now eat up. We've got some ass to kick. Zio pushed his plate away. Are you nervous? He asked Tio in a small voice. Hey, we'll be fine. We just gotta get through without being in last place, he said, giving Zio's arm an encouraging shake. You've got your bracelet, right? Zio nodded, tugging back his sleeve to reveal it safely on his wrist. A couple of seats away, Aurelio stared at it. Why do you have an Azabache bracelet? Aurelio asked, sounding more curious than anything, but the last thing Tio wanted was for Zio to be put on the spot by the golden boy at the trials. It's for good luck, Tio snapped, but Aurelio didn't even glance in his direction. Why do you need a bracelet to ward off bad luck if your dad is mala suerte? Why, are you scared of me? Zio asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. Aurelio said nothing. The two watched each other for a moment, but then Aurelio shook his head and turned away. A surprise laughed up in Tio's chest. Damn, I knew I liked you for a reason, Nia said with an approving nod. Yeah, I really don't think we need to worry about you holding your own, Tio agreed, bumping shoulders with Zio, who ducked his head and smiled. I trust you're ready to travel to your first host city? Luna asked as she entered the dining room. Immediately, excited murmurs passed between the golds. Even Nia was grinning ear to ear. Meanwhile, Tio tried to fight off the sinking feeling in his stomach. The day after each trial, you will have some time to explore the host city. For the first time, a thrill of excitement shot through Tio. Finally, he'd be able to see what other cities were like. And the hosting deals will throw us a farewell banquet that night before we board the boat again to travel to the next city. Your belongings have already been gathered, Luna continued, motioning for them to get up. So if you all follow me, we can begin our journey. Where are we going? Otzi asked, practically buzzing on the edge of her seat. Luna smiled. The host city for the first trial will be La Combre. Yes! Nia shouted, punching a fist in the air. Tio relaxed a little. He wasn't exactly relieved, but going to Nia's home city seemed less terrifying than any other option. Aristella scuffed and crossed her arms over her chest. That's not fair, Acela said, their face all scrunched up and angry. Oh, shut up, Nia snapped. Her dad is going to cheat to make it easier on her, Acela argued. Already making excuses for why you'll come in last, huh? Tio quipped. Acela's angry snarl was a satisfying sight. The host cities we decided on, designed by the gods long before the selection took place, Luna explained. Acela opened their mouth, but when Luna cut them a hard stare, they snapped it shut. Can you give us a hint at what the first trial will be? Xochitl asked and signed with a sweet voice, batting her eyelashes. Is there going to be lava? Otzi asked. I hope not, Marino choked. Wouldn't that put Aurelio and Aristella at an unfair advantage? Zio asked Tio, worry pinching his eyebrows. Before Tio could assure him, Aristella couldn't. Sucks to suck, she said with a sarcastic smile from across the table, not loud enough for Luna to overhear. A quiet tinking noise turned Tio's attention to Aurelio, who was tapping his fingers rhythmically on one of his golden armbands, his head turned toward the windows. Real useful. Tio rolled his eyes and ignored both of the twins. I'm sure I'll be fine, he told Zio, though he didn't quite believe it himself. There won't be any clues given out, Luna said, speaking over the wave of excited chattering. Tiara, being the one to host and organize the trial is a hint in and of itself. You're all smart and capable. Debatable, Tio grumbled under his breath. Zio covered his smile with his hand. I'm sure you can think up some scenarios on your own. It will be an even playing field for all competitors, Luna said, looking at everyone in turn. Understood? Tio had out a sarcastic snort. Even playing field. Sure. All he could do was try his best to take care of his friends. He just had to stay focused on that. And maybe fuck some with some goals along the way. Tio had seen cruise ships on TV before and plenty of commuter boats in person, but the boat they'd be using to travel through Reina del Sol was on a whole other level. Somewhere between a yacht and a ferry, it was sleek and tall with 3 levels of massive windows. The boat itself was white, but the hull was painted with turning waves in shades of cornflower, cobalt, and navy blue. The pattern looked familiar, but Tio couldn't quite place it, till he noticed the flags at the stern and the bow. The one at the back was white and had Sol's glyph stitched in golden thread, and the one on the front displayed Dioso Agua's tumbling waves. There's also banners displaying each of the competitors' glyphs. The jade-green eye of the Mall of Suerte and bird of Quetzal were the only pops of color among the gold pendants. The Golds, including Nia, walked right up the ramp like they did this all the time. Only Tio and Zio hung back. Whoa, Zio whispered. Tio was glad he wasn't the only one. This thing is bigger than my entire school. Tio grinned. Damn, and I thought Quetzal High was the smallest in all of Seoul, he teased with a nudge. When they reached the deck, Seoul Priest handed them thin crystal glasses with something clear and bubbly inside. This is way too fancy for me, Zio murmured before tentatively taking a sip. Nia laughed. Being a hero does have its perks. Salud! Tio took a big swig and his tongue was immediately assaulted by bitterness and sharp bubbles. He coughed and choked, shooting the liquid out of his nose. Oh my gods! Tio spluttered, frantically wiping at his burning nose as his eyes watered. What the hell was that? It's mineral water, Nia said while Zio dissolved in a fit of laughter. It's rancid, he coughed. Why does it taste like that? A haughty scoff caught their attention. Amateur, Acela said with a mean smirk. Poor, Aristella corrected, studying her fingernails. Before Tio could think of a smart-ass retort, Aurelio thrust a napkin in his face. You have snot on your chin, he said plainly. Everyone burst into a fresh peal of laughter. Tio pushed Aurelio's hand away and quickly wiped at his face. Yeah, got it. Thanks, he said gruffly, turning away. Zio at least had the decency to hide a smile behind his fist. Meanwhile, Nia cackled. So Tio wiped his hand off on her arm. But she only shrugged. I've got 2 older brothers. I've had grosser stuff wiped on me. Luna led them into a huge room filled with plush furniture and wide windows. Everything was polished wood, shiny bronze, or white upholstery. More soul priests awaited them, along with a crew of people in crisp white uniforms. Tio immediately recognized the one in front with the pixie cut and sharp gray eyes as Marina's older sister, Maria. This will be your new home during the trials, Luna said, coming to a stop next to Maria. I'm sure some of you know our captain. Marino grinned and his sister threw him a wink. Maria's taking time off from leading the search and rescue fleet to transport us to the host cities. Pleasure to have you on board, Maria said, her voice sharp and clear. Let's have a little tour and we'll be off shortly. This is the common area, Luna said, gesturing around them. It was filled with chairs, couches, and books. A large television that was currently showing the news sat on the back wall. Oddly enough, it was footage of the boat they were currently on, shot from the docks. If it weren't for the tinted glass, Tio could have waved and seen himself on the screen. There was also a large wooden table with cushioned chairs and a shelf loaded with games like El Gocho and Dominoes. Feel free to spend some time here between the trials and get to know one another better, Luna said before leading them back outside. Not likely, Tio said to Nia under his breath. This is the main deck, Maria said, leading them out into the main deck. As you know, we'll be headed for La Cumbre first and should be arriving by late afternoon. The deck had a large, semicircular white couch set into the shiny wood floor, so you had to step down into it. A glass table in the middle already held bottles of water and juice on ice along with fresh fruit. The boat shifted as it pulled away from the dock. As the boat picked up speed, the group rushed to the bow to look over the edge. Nia stepped up onto the railing and leaned her entire upper body over. She threw her arms into the air and crowed happily. How's this big thing going to get through? Zio asked. Tio turned to see that they were pointed at the wall of mountains that surrounded Soul Temple, heading straight for one of the waterfall passages, but there was no way the boat could possibly fit. Maria was deep in conversation with Luna, neither of them knew the least bit concerned. As they neared the wall of jagged rock, the small waterfall stretched, growing taller and wider until finally the water split open. The boat easily passed through, a light cascade of water raining down around them as they were plunged in the darkness of the cave. I guess that answers your question, Tio said to Zio. The goats spoke animatedly with one another, and Nia threw herself onto the white cushions of the couch. Man, I could get used to this, she sighed. Tio thought if Nia won the Sunbearer trials, she would adjust quite nicely to the life of a celebrity. The only people who didn't seem excited were Aurelio and Aristella. They hung back by the entrance of the common room, their usual air of grandiosity now a matching set of soft frowns, eyeing the air and water that dripped onto the deck. Then Tio realized, as a pair of fire demigods, being trapped on a boat surrounded by water was probably their worst nightmare. Not that he cared, obviously. As they made their way to the caves, Luna called them back inside. On the other end of the common room, double glass doors opened up to another deck. This is the aft deck. Dios Mais and Dios Pantos' meals will be served here, Maria said, showing them a dining table dressed with white linens. Tio's heart sank. Every meal? Yes, every meal, Luna said. I thought you were going to the cities, Tio pressed. You know, travel Reina del Sol, see the sights, eat the food. You will have designated time when you are allowed off the boat to be shown around as a group, Luna explained coolly. Tio groaned. A group? This is turning into a glorified field trip. Luna went on like she hadn't heard him. But aside from the host city banquets, you'll have your meals here also as a group. Maybe those were the rules, but what Luna didn't know wouldn't hurt her. As they continued their tour, Tio kept an eye out for potential escape routes. Maria led the way up a set of spiral stairs to the next floor. To the left was a corridor, and to the right, a single door. This is the main cabin, Maria explained. Above us is the bridge where my crew and I will be running this operation. Your cabins are this way. As they entered the hallway, Tio saw that their glyphs were once again displayed on each door. Each of you will have your own cabin with a private bathroom, Maria said. She opened the door to the first room, marked as Aristella's. It was a bit smaller than the ones in Soul Temple, but just as luxurious. Large portholes looked out above the waterline. As everyone rushed to find their rooms, Tio hung back. With all the opulence and excess, it was easy to get distracted from the real reason they were there. But Tio didn't forget. It was like he was staying at some really fucked up sleepaway camp where instead of giving out superlatives, someone got stabbed at the end of the summer. When they were done scoping things out, Maria gestured toward the other end of the hall. The training room is that way. Excited chatter broke out among the golds. Even Nia's face lit up as she followed everyone into the room. Tio rolled his eyes and glanced at Zio. Jocks. Should we follow them? Zio wondered, casting an uncertain look to Maria and Luna, the ones left in the hall, who were deep in their own conversation. Tio sighed. Yeah, I guess, he grumbled. There was no way he'd give anyone else the satisfaction of thinking he wasn't up for the challenge. Walking in the training room was like walking through a portal to a dystopian world dominated by the fitness industry. There was a climbing wall with different colored flags for some reason, huge racks of metal weights, and a bunch of machines that looked like torture devices. The golds were already putting the equipment to use. Some of them tried the obstacle courses that had been set up. Aristella's shadow box with ballet-like precision, and Estelle stomped around lifting literally anything heavy-looking that wasn't bolted to the ground. Do you know how any of this stuff works? Zio asked as they lingered by the door. I usually ditch PE, Tio confessed with a shrug. They could have asked Neo for pointers, but she was already halfway up the rock wall. If those meatheads can figure it out, can't be that complicated, right? Tio said, confidently walking up to a barbell loaded with weights, one of the few things he actually recognized. What could he lift? 200 pounds at least, right? He didn't know what the milk crates to kilograms conversion was. He bent forward and curled his arms around the bar. That's not how you do a deadlift, Aurelio said, so close to Tio that he felt the heat radiating from all his bare skin. When he looked up, the other boy was standing in front of him, again with that disapproving look on his face. Aurelio's words from last night burned into Tio's chest. They shouldn't be here. You're going to hurt yourself, Aurelio went on. Let him, Aristella said with a disdainful laugh, not even a glint of sweat on her brow. Tio glared. I think I know how to pick up something, he said. It's not rocket science. Aurelio gave a small shake of his head. He moved a step closer. You need to hold the weight close to your body and use your legs. Why do you care? Tio suddenly snapped. He didn't need Aurelio giving him pointers, or saving him, or making fun of him. He certainly didn't need more unwanted attention from everyone else in the room. He didn't need Aurelio. Period. Aurelio opened his mouth to respond, but Aristella's voice cut in. Yeah, why do you care? She stared at her brother, waiting for his response. For a moment, Aurelio stood there, looking between Tio and his sister like he couldn't decide what to do. Tio glared back, the only act of defiance he could manage to interrupt under those flinty eyes. Aurelio. Oh, Aurelio, Aristella insisted. Finally, Aurelio exhaled through pursed lips, then turned and walked away. Everyone moved back down. Tio scuffed and bent forward again. He grabbed the bar and wrenched. The good news was he was easily able to lift the weight. The bad news was that pain immediately exploded in his lower back, shooting up his spine. The weights dropped with such force, even Desi looked over. Tio had to clench his jaw to keep from yelping when Aurelio glanced back. He'd stood up, back rigid, quickly turned away so Aurelio wouldn't see his pained expression, but found Zio watching him with a concerned look. Are you okay? We gotta go, Tio managed between his teeth. Zio looked like he was trying not to smile. You need help? Tio nodded quickly and hobbled out of the training room. He needed to lie down. Chapter 8. Tio found his new cabin and took a long, hot shower, per Luna's suggestion. Luckily, his back wasn't completely destroyed. With his accelerated healing and the soothing heat, Tio felt substantially better by the time he got out of the shower. Now his ego just needed time to recover. Tio wiped the steam from the mirror and stared at his reflection. He shook out the water from his wings, they were impossible to reach with a towel, and stretched them out. He groaned. They were always so sore from being bound all day. Tio turned side to side, trying to get a look at them in the mirror. Part of him hoped that they'd miraculously change one day, but no such luck. His feathers were still dull and brown. Feminine. His wings were a part of him, his identity and his heritage, given to him by his mom, and they never felt right, as though they belonged to someone else or he'd been given the wrong ones. Tio had to work harder than a lot of guys to get the body he was meant to have, and most of the time that didn't bother him. Testosterone was testosterone, however it got into his body. But his wings refused to go with the program. Why wouldn't they be what they were supposed to be? Why couldn't they just be his? Frustrated, Tio took out a clean uniform and retrieved his backpack. Sitting on his bed, he fished out a small bottle of testosterone and a fresh syringe. The amber liquid moved like oil as he flicked the syringe to remove any air bubbles, tipped it upside down, and inserted the needle into his thigh. Giving himself his weekly dose of tea was quick and easy after doing it for so many years. When he was finished, Tio slapped on a band-aid and went to go find his friends. Nia had saved them a spot in some lounge chairs out on the deck. Tio listened while she and Zio sat together, flipping through the binder of trading cards a look of intense concentration. As a major gold city, Lacumbre wasn't far from the entrance to Soul City, but it was taking them forever to get there. He suspected the slow speeds were for show. As they coasted down the river, people stood along the banks, causeways, and bridges, waving and cheering like it was some kind of parade. Tio would have thought that Aristella and Aurelia would have been eating up the attention, but instead they were lying out on a large, sunken couch, soaking up the sun. Aristella's eyes were closed, her foot bouncing to whatever music she was listening to on her phone while Aurelia watched something on his. It was actually Estella who raced back and forth along the railing, waving at their audience. Whenever they triumphantly raised their hands over their head, the cheering swelled. Otzi, Zochi, and Desi ran around the bow of the boat, trying to evade Marino as he sprayed them with jets of water he pulled from the river. Otzi used a fancy gold tray to protect her hair, while Zochi danced out of Marino's reach. They laughed, shouted, and chased each other, seemingly without a care in the world. Were they all so confident about the trials and none of them were the least bit worried? Dread in his stomach kept getting heavier the farther they got from Soul Temple. It made him feel like he was walking through mud by the time they went to the upper deck for lunch. Everyone else was wide awake and hyper, talking animatedly and laughing. The only other person who seemed brightly worried was Zio. He plopped into the seat next to Tio and stared intently at his plate of food but didn't touch a thing. Tio wanted to reassure him, but right now he couldn't even reassure himself. Soon they'd be competing in their first trial, and Tio was starting to worry about whether he could make it through one, let alone all 5. He couldn't even lift a weight without fucking up. How was he supposed to compete with elite golds who had the advantage of training for the trials with professional heroes? Tio was pulled from his catastrophizing with an errant stream of water meant for Desi hit Aurelio and Aristella. Aurelio flinched, but Aristella gaped loudly and leapt to her feet. Otzi, Zochi, Desi, Marino all froze, realizing their grave mistake. Aristella turned on them, her pristine ponytail now a sopping mess. She bared her teeth and clenched her hands into fists. The water on her skin sizzled and evaporated into wisps of steam. Desi clammed her hands over her mouth, eyes wide with alarm. "Scatter!" Marina shouted and signed. "She can't kill all of us!" Sochi followed up before grabbing Otzi's small hand and making a run for it. "Watch me!" Aristella roared. As the other four scrambled to get away, Aurelio shut the water out from the speakers of his phone. When it seemed to be working, he sat back and watched Aristella terrorize the others. Aurelio had a pinched and unsure expression on his face. It was one Tio had seen many times when they were little kids, and Aurelio wanted to play with the others but didn't know how to start. Back then, Tio would have just grabbed his arm and pulled him into whatever game it was. Watching him now, he wondered if Aurelio and Aristella's tendency to keep them themselves was by design, or if, despite his celebrity status, Aurelio hadn't changed as much as he thought. "What are you watching?" Tio asked from across the deck, surprising both Nia and Zio. Aurelio blinked. "Me?" "No, the guy behind you." Aurelio turned. "Yes, you!" "Baking videos?" Aurelio replied, wiping the screen dry on his shirt. Tio squinted at him, unable to tell if he was being sarcastic. Aurelio responded with an arched eyebrow. Tio huffed. "Fine, don't tell me." That was what he got for trying to make small talk. Around them, the terrain grew hillier as the mountains in the distance gradually got closer. "Are we there yet?" Zio asked Nia, who nodded enthusiastically, a wide smile brightening her face. "Nearly. We'll be disembarking soon," Luna said, appearing at the door. Aristella stood with her fists in her hips, both Marina and Desi pinned under her foot. Sochi and Otzi peeked out from behind a lounge chair where they had taken refuge. Luna squinted at them but decided not to ask. "Please head back to your rooms to make yourselves presentable," she said. Tio's stomach clenched. Once we disembark, we are heading straight to the first trial. Tucked into the northwestern mountain range of Reino del Sol, La Cumbre was gorgeous and unlike any city Tio had ever seen. Its name referred to the large, dormant volcano the city was built against, the top of which sat Tierra's temple. Tio had never seen mountains so big and up close. The buildings were tucked into the mountainside, carved into the stone, and there was a lot fewer trees than he'd imagined. The city shone, gold plating and silver trimmings glittering in the waning sunlight. Small paths zigzagged their way up the steep mountainside. The roads themselves weren't paved but were made of soft, packed dirt. The goals chatted among themselves up ahead, placing their bets on what the first trial would be. Meanwhile, Nia and Tio hung back, Zio walking between them. "I hope it's a race," said Zochi, readjusting the flowers that she'd taken from a bouquet in the kitchen and put in her hair. "How about hand-to-hand combat?" was Aristella's enthusiastic guess. "I want to fight a Dios," Celo announced, punching their fists in their palm. "They're not going to do that after what happened 90 years ago," Aurelia said, voice edged with annoyance. Tio shot Nia a concerned look over Zio's head. "What happened 90 years ago?" "Oh, competitors had to fight Dios Culebra." But she got a little overexcited, Nia explained with a shrug, as if it were common knowledge. "Ended up constricting the competitors and breaking their spines." She snapped her fingers. "Right in half." "Dios," Tio hissed under his breath. "Never heard about that." "Part of the curriculum of the academy is learning about all the past trials," Nia explained. "We use them as practice exercises." "Great. Just another gold advantage." "Bummer, though." Nia sighed. "Be pretty cool to be able to say I fought a Dios." Tio gave her a bewildered look. "You gods are out of control." Zio remained silent at his side, staring straight ahead and not blinking in a way that made Tio nervous he might pass out before they got to the destination. He needed not to let his own nerves get the better of him, for Zio's sake. If he started panicking, then Zio would too. That wouldn't do either of them any good walking in the first trial. He had to keep his expressions in check and push his worries down deep, where they could later manifest as a stomach ulcer or something. "Don't be scared," Tio said quietly, so the golds wouldn't overhear. "I'm not." But Zio's voice was tight as he continued to stare ahead. Tio and Nia exchanged worried glances. The streets of the city were full of spectators lined up to watch them arrive. Tierra's glyph, 3 mountains of the sun rising behind them, adorned lampposts, and altars to the god of earth were set outside businesses. Nia was clearly the crowd favorite. She had a huge smile plastered across her face as she waved, practically bouncing with excitement. Larger-than-life posters of Nia hung in shop windows and massive murals were painted on the sides of buildings. Apparently, Chisme worked faster than Tio had realized, because when they rounded a corner, he was horrified to find a line of all 10 competitor portraits taped up in the large windows of a grocery store. The goals looked like professional athletes who modeled all the time, posed, smiling, and powerful. Even Zio looked great, if a bit uncomfortable. His chin was raised and he stared right into the camera with a fierce look of determination. Meanwhile, Tio's poster on the far left was downright painful to look at. The uniform seemed even tighter on him than in a mirror, and his face was pinched into a weird grimace, his hands in tight fists at his sides. A humiliated blush burned Tio's cheeks, and he tried to duck behind Nia, hoping no one would recognize him. "We are about to enter the arena," Dios Luna announced and signed as they walked to the huge circular stadium. "Get into a single file line and follow me inside. Your parents will be waiting for you. Please join them and I'll go over the rules before we get started," she said with a smile. Tio took one last shaggy breath before following the others through the looming arches. They entered a long tunnel. What felt like thousands of voices bounced against the stone walls. When they stepped out into the arena, cheers from the crowd exploded. The space was as massive as it was ancient. Weathered stone stadium seating surrounded the other edge of the arena. Scattered amid the La Cumbre residents, waving posters in neon, were pockets of other priests and semi-dioses, probably representing their home cities, everyone grouped with colorful robes and banners. White flags rippled throughout the stands, mostly displaying Tierra's glyph, but Tio could see the other gold competitors had all supporters as well. Among the sea of white, there wasn't a single jade flag. Tio wasn't surprised, but it still stung. The only spot of blue and purple was the far upper corner, where Cuatro Malasuerte's priest sat. A huge screen dominated the stands, displaying Chisme in a chair on the right, while Verdi was on the left. Chisme was decked out in a white cotton outfit with an excessive amount of gold jewelry, including large hoop earrings, but Verdi wore the same boring black and white suit. Verdi's expression was serious, while Chisme's was overly animated, but Tio couldn't hear what he was saying over the noise of the crowd. The promotional images of the competitors swiped across the screen one at a time. Normally, having a 30-foot-tall, painfully awkward image of himself on display in front of tens of thousands of people would have been enough to send him spiraling, but there was something even more dire. Rising up from a body of water in the center of the stadium was a craggy mountain. Steeply pitched, it was covered in lush tropical plants and trees. Tiny cascades of water fell at intervals, cutting through switchbacks that led up the steep face of the mountain. At the very top, a boulder-sized slab of gold, carved with Sol's glyph, sat gleaming in the sunlight. The full stand's entire peak were dizzying. Tio did his best to keep walking forward as vertical sent his legs wobbling. Zio followed Neo with determined steps. Aurelio and Aristella had already turned on the charm as they walked out into the stadium. Aristella smiled and waved while her brother lifted one hand, his mother ranged in a smile, his eyes sharp and focused. The crowd welcomed the competitors with cheers as Luna led them to a platform where the Dioses waited. Aurelio and Aristella took their places on either side of their mother, as if standing guard, while Desi ran the last few steps to his mom. Amor, the beautiful and full-figured goddess of love and community, swept him into a hug. When they broke apart, they signed animatedly to each other while matching apple-cheeked smiles. As everyone split off to join their parents, Tio focused on his breathing as he crossed over to his mom. He felt outside of his own body, like he was on autopilot, and he was just along for the ride. He thought seeing her would calm him down, but she looked just as anxious as he felt. "Are you okay?" she asked, hugging him tight. "Yes," Tio lied. When she released him, he stood close to her side, looking anywhere but at the overwhelming crowd. His throat was tight, the neck of his uniform suffocating. To his left, Zio was with his dad. Malasuerte's expression was stony and unfriendly as he stood still as a statue, his hand on Zio's shoulder. "Welcome to the Tepetle," Luna called in a magnified voice as she stepped forward. The roaring cheers dulled to a low hum. Dios Mariachi, smiling in his white suit with brass cornet in hand, stood to her right and a familiar figure stood to her left. It was strange seeing Phantasma out in broad daylight. Usually she didn't show up to events until nightfall, and she spent most of the time as a wallflower, hanging out in the shadows. It was obvious to Tio, that this wasn't in her comfort zone either. Her hands fidgeted as nervously as the butterflies around her. But for Tio, seeing her was a relief, a friend in an otherwise unfriendly place, even if Phantasma was a morbid reminder of the trial stakes. Tio smiled at her, and she wiggled her fingers in a tiny wave with the slightest quirk of her lips. "She's so creepy." Aristella stared at Phantasma, her mouth twisted in disgust. "Why does she never talk?" Ocello snorted. "I heard she doesn't have a tongue." "Probably eaten by maggots," Aristella replied. Aurelio glanced over at his sister. He frowned, a deep crease between his eyebrows, and for a second Tio thought he might actually grow a pair and say something, but no. Instead he looked away, his attention focused back on Luna as he tapped his armband again. Angry he flushed through Tio. He clenched his hands in a fist, nostrils flared as he tried to focus on what Luna was saying instead of picking a fight. "The object of this trial is to race to the top of the mountain," Diosa Luna explained and signed, her voice amplified by a mic. "Along the way, there will be 10 markers with their city's glyphs, including the final one at the top. You must activate them by touch, one at a time, as you race to the finish. Each competitor has a separate but identical path with obstacles along the way. If you don't reach the top in time, or if you step out into another competitor's path, it will negatively affect your ranking. Luna warned. I smell a loophole, Aristella murmured to Ocello. Tio rolled his eyes. Competitors have 10 minutes to reach the top of the mountain, Luna explained as Soul Priestess handed each of them a black rubber watch. When Tio put his on his wrist, it buzzed in the face flash of his mother's glyph. There is a barrier at the finish point. When you cross it, you lock in your position and will not be able to leave until the trial is over. 10 minutes? The mountain looked about as tall as the Quetzal Temple, which he easily climbed every day, but this was a mountain with obstacles, whatever the hell that meant. Tio's mind raced to come up with a strategy. The mountain looked like one of his favorite reality shows, Secrets of the Lost Temple. Competitors attempted to complete a series of obstacle courses of increasing difficulty up a fake mountain. Tio used to be obsessed with it when he was little. When he thought about it like that, the trial was a little less scary. It was basically the same thing, except it was an actual mountain. Instead of foam and padded edges, it ended in steep cliffs and rugged terrain. Tio swallowed hard. How difficult could it be? They crossed the bridge to the base of the mountain, where each competitor's glyphs was on the ground, equidistant from one another. It was easy to make out the switchbacks of his own path up the side. The first glyph to activate sat at the entrance, a carved piece of jade above the size and shape of a headstone. A little too on the nose, if you ask Tio. He couldn't see Nia, but to his left, a cell separated him and Zio, and to his right, Ozzy stood poised on the balls of her feet with Aristelle on her other side. So much for teaming up with his friends. Tio tried to mirror Ozzy's starting position, as if that would give him some kind of edge, and shook out his arms. He just needed to stay on his path, activate all of his glyphs, and get to the top without getting disqualified. On your marks, Luna's amplified voice echoed. Tio's glyph pulsed with light, and his watch buzzed with the same beat. Get set! Mariachi's cornet trumpeted. The Quetzal glyph flashed at the same time, and the watch made a long buzz. Tio ran. As soon as he hit the first glyph, it glowed with bright, jade-green light, and his watch gave a short vibration. The terrain of the mountain alternated between rocky and lush. A waterfall started somewhere far up above and ran perpendicular to his path. Tio sloshed through the water on each switchback, the stream growing stronger the higher he went. Tio ran as quickly as he could, but by the time he got to the second switchback and slapped the next glyph, his lungs burned. He wasn't a runner. He didn't agree with his binder. It didn't agree with his binder, and he didn't know a damn thing about maintaining his pace. A loud noise jolted Tio out of his focus. Higher on the mountain, Otzi and Aristella duked it out from their respective sections. Aristella kept lobbing balls of fire at Otzi, who deflected by conjuring up thick sheets of rain with a swipe of her arm. The water sizzled and steamed on impact. When she had an opening, a crackling bolt of lightning materialized in Otzi's hand, electric and shuddering, before she threw it at Aristella like a spear. Aristella narrowly avoided the bolt. It crashed into a tree with a thundering crack, splitting it in half. Tio was so hilariously, terrifyingly out of his league. The goats had real powers and strength. Even small Ozzy could easily kick his ass if she wanted to. She could hurl lightning bolts with her hands, for soul's sake. At least they were keeping one another busy. On the third switchback, Tio hit his first obstacle. The path suddenly ended, and Tio, distracted by the battle overhead, almost went right over the edge. He skidded to a stop, arms pinwheeling, and threw himself against the craggy side of the mountain. Sharp stones dug into his wings. A sheer cliff separated him from the next glyph, his foot mere inches from a steep drop. The stream of the waterfall trailed down the open space to a switchback far below. Shit, he hissed, gulping down air. How is he supposed to get across? Precious moments ticked away as he tried to come up with a plan. He couldn't fly. He hadn't used his wings since he was little, and now was not the time to experiment. He sure as shit wasn't going to attempt to jump it, semidiosis or not. Frantically, he looked around for something to help him. There were plenty of trees, but going straight up wouldn't do him any good because he still needed to activate the glyph from the other side of the gap. But there was a thick branch that extended out with a thick vine hanging from it, just in case. Tio grabbed hold and gave it 3 sharp yanks to make sure it would take his weight. He used rope swings along the banks of the canals in summertime. It wouldn't be much more difficult than that, right? Before he could second-guess himself, Tio held on for dear life and, with a running leap, swung out across the drop. He clenched his teeth, holding back his shout, and released the vine when he was over solid ground. Gracelessly, he landed on his butt, but he didn't fall to his death, so he'd take the bruises. Yes! He shouted, punching his fist in the air. He hit the next glyph, and his watch gave him another short buzz. There was a gust of air, something large flew right over his head. A boulder smashed into the tree he just swung from. Branch, vine, and stone crumbled down the side of the mountain. Tio swung around in time to see another flying right for his head. Quickly, he dropped to the ground. The boulder smashed into the cliff face, rubble showering down around him. Tio choked on dirt and grime, pushing himself up onto his knees. Through a gap in the trees, he could see Estelle standing menacingly, hefting a large rock in their burly arms. You missed! Tio shouted, fueled by spite. Acelo chucked the rock. Tio threw himself between two large boulders, narrowly avoiding the projectile. Tio poked his head out from his hiding spot and smirked. He'd half thought a gold would have better aim. "Are you angry because you're so short?" he called out. Acelo bared their teeth. Tio did what he knew every bully hated to be on the receiving end of. He laughed, short and sharp. Acelo slammed their fist into a tree, splintering its trunk. They drew into a deep breath, their chests swelling, growing, changing. They tipped their head back and released a bellow. No, not a bellow, but a roar. Acelo's body changed, their muscles growing and rippling under their skin, hulking out like some kind of luchador. Their nails morphed into claws and 4 heavy canines protruded from their mouth. When Acelo bared their teeth, their amber eyes bulged. Tio immediately regretted everything. How could he compete with this? Overhead, Mariachi's cornet rang out, and Tio's watch gave 2 short buzzes, announcing someone had reached the finish. Seriously? Tio craned his neck at the top of the mountain but the top of the mountain was still far out of sight. How had someone already made it I need to slow down. Okay. How had someone made it already? Apparently having the same thought, Acelo gave him one last snarl before rushing off. Tio needed to hurry. The higher he went, the steeper the terrain became. Not long after the 4th glyph, the waterfall crashed over the path. Even in his fancy new shoes, Tio's foot still in the slick stones and moss as he crossed to the next glyph and activated it. Buzz! On the next switchback, the path was gone, replaced instead by jagged rocks protruding straight up into the air. It looked like the tops had been sliced off so they could act as stepping stones, but they weren't close enough to step from one to the other. If Tio was going to cross, he'd have to jump between them. They were barely larger than his foot wet from the waterfall. Adrenaline was working against him, making it hard for Tio to focus. On top of that, he was short of breath and his legs were dangerously unsteady. 2 short trumpets of the cornet cut through the air. Buzz! Buzz! He didn't have time to think. He just needed to go. Tio ran and leapt for the first stone. His foot hit true. There was no time to hesitate. If he slowed down, he could lose his balance. So Tio used the momentum and jumped to the next stone, one leg at a time. He was nearly to the other side when the cornet startled him. Buzz! Buzz! Tio's foot slipped as he launched himself from the final stone. He stepped on a breath, his body pitched forward. Tio stretched out his arms, desperately trying to reach for the outcropping. His chest slammed into the edge, crushing the air from his lungs. His ribs exploded with pain. Legs dangling over the jagged rocks down below, Tio started to slip. Panic squeezed his heart in an icy grip. He scrambled, desperately clawing his way to stable ground, but the mud slipped between his fingers. A strangled shout caught in his throat as his chin dragged painfully over rock. He kicked his legs wildly, trying to get leverage. Finally, his foot caught on a protruding rock. With all his might, Tio pushed off. The rock crumbled under his foot, but he was able to throw himself forward. Kicking and crawling on his arms, Tio got himself back on solid ground. Covered in mud, he collapsed onto his back, staring up at the lush canopy. His heart thudded painfully as he gulped down air. But the cornet trumpeted again. Buzz! Buzz! Tio smacked his 6th glyph, buzz, and pressed on to activate the 7th. Buzz! Then he reached the apex of the waterfall. It flowed from an unknown source within the mountain and spilled out from a hollow space between jutting rocks, thundering down onto the path below. This time the glyph was nestled within the waterfall in a small cave. Tio could barely glimpse the jade stone through the frothy cascade. Carefully, Tio edged closer. Water sprayed his face, stinging his skin, obscuring his vision. The rushing was relenting. When he stepped too close, the force of it nearly shoved his foot out from underneath him. Tio turned and pressed his body against the cliff face. With his right hand, he wedged his fingers deep into the nearest crevice. Pressing his cheek into the wet stone, he leaned out, blindly reaching with his left hand. The second he tried to reach through it, the water violently shoved his arm out of the way with such force it nearly tossed him off the ledge. Gritting his teeth, Tio tried again. This time, he pressed his palm flat against the mountainside, sliding it behind the waterfall so it wouldn't knock him away again. He stretched as far as he could, and finally, his fingers touched the smooth surface of jade. Behind the water, the 8th glyph lit up. Buzz! The path ended at the waterfall, so he needed to find another way up the rest of the mountain. With only one glyph before the final at the top, it was now so steep he'd essentially have to climb. Tio tried to catch his breath as he scoped out the best path, cold water dripping from his hair and down the back of his neck. It was mostly boulders and sharp outcroppings. He could see the 9th glyph sitting on a flat sheet of rock. Above it was another 15 feet or so of rocky cliff face before the summit of the mountain. There were distant voices, and Tio could even see the top of Sol's glyph undulating with golden light. He was almost there. He still had time. He needed to keep pushing forward. With trembling hands and shaky breath, Tio climbed. Sharp stone bit his fingertips, drawing beads of jade blood as he grasped for handholds, wedging his foot between some rocks. The heavy, humid air did little to cool him down, and the smell of earthy moss filled his lungs. Dragging his chest over unyielding stone, he pulled himself higher up the cliff face. The ninth cliff was nearly in reach now, the J just a few inches away. If he stretched, he could probably hit it. Desperately, Tio pushed off with his foot. The rock supporting him gave way. A yelp lodged in Tio's throat. Choking on dirt, he held on for dear life as gravel shifted and slid. Overhead, he heard Nia's voice call out, "Tio!" He looked up. Estella made it to the top of the mountain. Instead of crossing the barrier that marked the finish, they stood at the very edge of the platform, a large piece of slate hefted in their arms. Tio's heart stopped. Estella grinned, their eyes black as pits. They tracked the slate and Tio flinched, but Estella didn't throw the chunk of rock at him. Instead, it crashed in the section to Estella's right, Zio's path. Tio saw him, curled up in a small ball and wedged between two boulders, covering his head as rock shifted and clattered down around him. The rock face splintered and crumbled under Zio's hands, and he fought to keep a grip. Fear and anger roared inside Tio. Estella was ruthless and so strong, there was nothing Zio could do to defend himself. Instead of just finishing the trial, Estella wanted to fuck with him. Tio needed to do something and not helplessly cling to the cliffside. He couldn't cross over to Zio's section to help him because then they'd both get their scores docked, but if he did nothing, Estella was going to crush Zio under a rock slide. If he wanted to help Zio, he'd have to stop Estella. Estella, the half-jaguar gold demigod who could hurl whole boulders the size of donkeys. There was no way to even the playing field. He couldn't beat Estella hand to hand, but maybe he could outsmart him. Tio had a secret weapon, if he was willing to use them. They were the only leg up he had in these trials, especially this one. It was practically made for a flying competitor to dominate. As Estella heaped another slab of stone, Tio's anger and determination went out. I really hope this works, Tio thought as he summoned every ounce of strength he had left. Tio strained his wings as hard as he could. His binder ripped and popped as they broke free and extended. With no time to second-guess himself, Tio flapped his wings down forcefully and propelled himself to the next outcropping. He overshot it a little, crashing into the cliff and sliding down to where he'd been trying to land. His neglected muscles screamed and seared with white-hot pain, but Tio pushed through it, beating his wings once, twice. By the third, he was up in the air, flying up the side of the mountain. Estella froze with the boulder held over their head. Shock flashed across their face. They shook their head roughly, as if clearing their vision, and when they looked up, Stella's yellow-green eyes were wide and confused. As Tio shot past them, he twisted his hips and struck Stella's head with the inside of his foot like it was an ugly soccer ball. Stella fell back, which was good, but the sudden shift sent Tio tumbling through the air. Desperately, Tio tried to regain his balance, pinwheeling his arms and trying to flap his wings. He managed to right himself, and when he looked back, Estella was sitting in the dirt, dazed, as a line of gold blood slid down the corner of the mouth. He did it! He stepped Estella and he was flying! Tio hadn't done this since he was little. Mike and his mom were always worried about him getting hurt, which made sense because he had so little control over his wings when he was small. He could only ever get a few feet off the ground. That was before he had fully matured. Tio had given up on using his wings when his body started to change. He had no idea how good it would feel to stretch his wings out and fly. For a moment, he just breathed, relishing the air rushing over him. The sensation of flying filled his chest with euphoria, so much so that Tio found himself laughing. But now he needed to focus. He was still in the middle of the trial and needed to make sure Zio was okay. "Holy shit, Tio!" Nia shouted to him from the top of the mountain. A huge smile plastered across her face. She was standing next to Soul's glyph behind a shimmering barrier that must have been the finish point. Xochi, Aristella, and Aurelio stood next to her. They seemed stunned. The ever-stoic Aurelio's lips were actually parted as he stared up at Tio. "What?" Tio shouted back through strained cuffs. He was quickly running out of breath, his body feeling heavy with every beat of his wings. "Look at your wings!" Nia screamed, jumping up and down. In the thrill of flying, for once Tio hadn't thought about what his wings looked like. He spent so much time trying to avoid the sight in his periphery and mirrors. Now he hesitantly glanced over his shoulder and let out a surprised yelp. His wings were no longer the familiar sight he had spent every morning hiding. They were in brown and patching. Now, brilliant ultramarine, iridescent blue, and electric green feathers sprang from his back. The feathers of a proper male Quetzal. Chapter 9. Fully extended, the brilliant feathers fluttered as Tio kept himself in the air, far above the water down below. He felt like his heart was going to burst out of his chest. Tio whooped and punched his fist into the air. That sent him toppling again. This time, he quickly recovered. It was like suddenly having a second set of arms. He knew how wings worked, but he never bothered to learn how to properly fly. He was already exhausted and losing all the momentum the adrenaline had given him. How the hell was he going to get himself down? He didn't get long to figure it out. There was a sudden explosion of white light. A crashing boom. A jolting, excruciating pain exploded into his body. Every muscle seized. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. Down, down, down he fell, crashing in the freezing water below. Cold, dripping wet, and humiliated, Tio stood next to his mother as they waited for Sol's rankings. To the side, Nia flashed him a thumbs up, her grin wild and excited. After Otzi had zapped him out of the sky with a lightning bolt, Diosa Agua had been kind enough to scoop him out of the water so he didn't drown. Though he could have done without the goddess's amused laugh as she dumped him back on the platform in front of the huge crowd. At least Otzi had the decency to give him an apologetic shrug. "Just look at them, Tio," his mother cooed, running her fingers across the new wings. They shuddered and shook themselves out, tickled by the touch, and sprang anyone close with water. "Mom," he pleaded, but he couldn't stop smiling. The embarrassment of getting eliminated in front of a crowd of tens of thousands of people was a war with his excitement over his changed wings, but there were still bigger issues at hand. Tio tried to get a good look at Zio, but Mala Suerte stood in the way, talking to his son and properly offering reassurances. Already, Tio felt like he was failing the younger boy. Asal seemed quite pleased with himself, smugly eyeing Tio after exchanging affectionate headbutts with Diosa Guerrero. And while Xochitl seemed to be actively ignoring Tio as her mother fussed over regrowing the flowers in her hair, the way Desi openly smiled at his wings made Tio blush. Desi signed something and Tio was about to apologize because he didn't know sign language when someone said, "They're very handsome." Aurelio stood behind Tio with his head tipped to the side, studying his wings, while Aristilla was distracted talking to the mom. Tio's breath hitched. "What?" Aurelio's attention snapped to his eyes. He stood up straighter. "That's what Desi said." Tio's stomach dropped. "Oh." He turned away from Aurelio, not wanting him to see the flush dripping across his cheeks. To Desi, he signed, "Thank you." It was the only sign he knew. Stubborn things, aren't they?" Quetzal mused and signed before trailing her fingers down the bright feathers. "Not unlike yourself," she added with a teasing smile. "Took them long enough," Tio grumbled. His left wing twitched and whacked him across the face. He spluttered through his feathers. "Hey! I suspect they refused to change until you properly accepted they were a part of you," his mom reasoned with a knowing look. "That you needed them." Tio glanced at Aurelio again, but he had already gone back to his sister. Aristilla stood next to her mom, hands on her hips and looking smug. Her makeup was still perfectly in place. The light sheen on her forehead somehow made her look even prettier. Diosa Lumbre had that same half-bored, half-annoyed look on her face. Her back was to Aurelio as he inspected his silk-covered hands. He flexed his gloved fingers and massaged his thumb into his palm. He looked perplexed, like he was trying to solve some complicated math problem in his head, but something wasn't adding up right. Then someone called to Aurelio from the crowd and he looked up, his reserved smile back in place as he waved. Tio didn't know how the others had ranked, but it'd be a miracle if Sol didn't put him in dead last. Not only had he not completed the trial, but he had failed it in an epic fashion. Chesney was going to have a field day with the footage. Diosa Luna gathered everyone's attention. "Sol has gathered the rankings," she announced, gesturing to two priests who wrote out a large stone slate. On its face, Sol's symbol was engraved and filled with gold paint. Along the bottom, each of the 10 competitors' glyphs sat in a horizontal line, 8 made of gold and 2 made of jade. There were 2 Lumbre glyphs, one with an O in the flames for Aurelio, and the other with an A for Aristella. For a moment nothing happened, but then the glyphs moved, positioning themselves in a vertical ranking in the center of the sun. Aristella shrieked, her composure flying out the window when she saw she'd come in first. She tried to recover, but the grin on her face was insuppressible. With a soft smile, Aurelia reached over and gave his sister's hand a gentle squeeze. In the most affectionate act Tio had ever seen from the goddess, Diosa Lumbre nodded her approval. "Congratulations, Aristella," Luna said. "If you come with us," Verdad said, peering out of nowhere with Chisme at her side, "we'd love to get a few words." "An exclusive interview with our first top-ranked competitor," Chisme sang, draping his arms across Aristella's shoulders as he led her to a group of waiting cameras and reporters. But Tio couldn't care less who came in first. He quickly skimmed the list as thundering cheers broke out from the stands, not at all surprised by Aristella, Aurelio, and Nia being so high. Xochitl and Diosa Primavera held hands and screeched with excitement. Looking smug, Dios Tormentoso nudged a very angry Guerrero. Tio expected to be at the very bottom, but to his surprise, "8th?" Tio breathed. Beside him, Quetzal exhaled a sigh of relief, her hand pressing to her chest. "Thanks, Sol." Zio was right beneath him, in 9th. Tio leaned around his mom to see that Zio was covered in dirt but otherwise unharmed. As he stared up at the rankings, his lips pressed into a line. Behind him, Mala Suerte seized Zio's shoulders and gave him a small shake. The Dios's expression was unreadable, but Tio could see his skin looked even paler than usual, and the sweat on his brow probably had little to do with the sun overhead. If Zio was in 9th, that meant his run must have been even more of a disaster than Tio's, but at least neither of them was last. In 10th place was... Acelo fumed. "Marino, Tio, and Zio didn't reach the top within the allotted time," Diosa Luna explained. So why am I last? Ocello demanded. Teo's eyes nearly bulged out of his skull. Murmurs floated throughout the crowd. Teo knew good and well that Luna was the last Diosa you'd want to piss off. Ocello, Guerrero hissed. The jaguar-headed god looked just as outraged as Ocello, but at least they had the brain to scold a child for speaking so brazenly to Diosa Luna. Luna gave them a smile, completely void of warmth. Are you questioning Soul's ringing? She asked, her voice resonating more loudly as the crowd grew silent. Sal seemed to immediately regret their decision. I don't... You intentionally used rocks to destroy another semi-Diosa's glyphs, making it impossible for them to complete the trial. Then you caused a rock slide, which fairly impacted your competitors, yes, but also put the priests acting as spotters at the base of the mountain in grave danger. The Diosas had to step in to protect them. Sal's eyes cut to the mountain, where dust still swirled in the air like fog. Teo hated to think what would have happened to him if it weren't for his wings. He was a demigod, yes, but he didn't think that would have saved him from being splattered under a bunch of boulders. I would remind you, Ocello, Luna said slowly, deliberately, that as a semi-Diose, it is both your honor and your duty to protect the people of René del Sol, not harm them. Your behavior in this trial proved that you have much to learn about your position in the world. Be careful. This trial is complete, Diosa Luna addressed the crowd, leaving Ocello red-faced, their head lowered. Neo looked like Luna had just brought her a platter of pan dulce. Teo wanted to enjoy this moment too, but he couldn't. He and Zio managed to stay out of last place, but only due to Ocello badly fucking up. Something told Teo they wouldn't be so lucky in the next trial. If Teo wasn't careful, one of them was going to end up dead. No Hatero, but damn, Teo, your wings! Nia circled Teo back on the boat. Does this make me a furry? Shut up! Teo swatted at her, trying to get his wings out of her reach. After taking a shower and nursing her bruised ego, he'd met up with Nia and Zio in the common room. What? Nia said, laughing. I'm just saying, they look really good. Teo did his best to look annoyed even though, secretly, compliments left him feeling warm and buzzing. When they folded up, the top of his wings hit his shoulders and the long primary feathers ended at the small of his back. But with their new freedom, they didn't want to cooperate. Instead, they ruffled and stretched like they couldn't stand staying still. They are really cool, Zio agreed from his perch in an armchair. And your hair looks great too, Nia added. My hair? Teo reached up. It was still wet from his shower, but didn't feel any different. You didn't see? Nia grabbed Teo and pushed him over to a circular, gold-framed mirror hanging on the wall. Instead of a dull brown, his hair turned a deep, iridescent black. What the? Luminous hints of blue and green caught in the light when he turned his head. Folks pay good money to try to dye their hair like that, Nia said. How did you not notice? Zio asked. 'Cause I was too distracted by my wings, he murmured, tugging on a lock of his hair. Taking a shower with his wings had been nothing short of a struggle. They had knocked over every single bottle of fancy toiletries. He tried to wrangle them into one of his binders, but now it was like they had a mind of their own, with zero intention of letting Teo restrain them again. You should let them be free, Nia said, moving a lounge on the arm of Zio's chair. They're badass, and if you learn how to actually use them, they'll give you an edge in the trials. No offense, but, you could use it. Teo glared, but he knew she was right. Today had been a catastrophic failure he couldn't afford to repeat. And they saved her life, Zio added in a voice that immediately made Teo feel guilty for taking up all the attention. Are you okay? He asked Zio, turning away from the mirror. Zio blinked his dark eyes slowly at Teo, offering him a wry smile. All things considered, I guess, Teo added. Well, I didn't get squished under a landslide, so I guess that was lucky, he mused with a small shrug. The hell even happened? Teo asked. Always a Chimosa, Neo jumped right in. Okay, so I was next to Aurelio and Xochi, she said, talking a mile a minute and gesturing wildly. Aurelio? Couldn't be bothered. He basically did a speed run to the top and that was that. Mario tried to use the waterfall to slow him down, but he wasn't quick enough. I was doing awesome, totally killing it, she said, cuttering her hand across her neck for emphasis. But then Xochi did, like, a dive-by vining. 1 second I was sticking in the mountain, looking awesome, then BAM! Nia punched the back of the chair, nearly toppling Zio over. It was like BDSM, which is hot, but without consent, which is not hot. Okay. Zio's eyes bulged. Teo let out a surprised laugh. But, I just whipped up some silver blades and shing shing! Nia slashed her hands in the air. I was back on my game. By the time I got to the top, Aristella, Aurelio, and Xochi were already there, and I could pretty much only see folks as they finished. But then fucking Ocello showed up. Neo's voice raised, a scowl firmly in place. They were about to cross the barrier to finish, but then they just stopped. Aristella even tried to get them to finish, and they usually do whatever she says, but they got this weird look and decided to fuck with the rest of y'all. Anger simmered under Tio's skin. So it wasn't enough for them to finish on time. Stella had to make it harder on everyone else for no good reason. What a douche, Tio growled. Ugh, sorry. A massive douche, Nia agreed. Did Estella really destroy your glyphs? He asked Zio, who nodded and sank lower in his chair. Nia huffed. I mean, it's established Estella is a douche. Right. But that's extra douchey, even for them. Tio gave her a skeptical look, but she went on. Even Aurelio tried to tell them to stop right before they caused the rock slide. He did? Tio cut in, surprised. Since when did Aurelio go against Estella? Yeah, but it was like Estella didn't even hear him, Nia continued. Usually the others follow whatever the twins want. Then they caused the rock slide, Zio said, fiddling with his bracelet. I rushed myself into a spot between two boulders and waited for it to be over. Well, at least you didn't get smashed into a pulp, Nia offered, trying to sound optimistic. You don't have any semidiasis powers that can help you out in the trials? Zio asked, feeling a bit desperate for some kind of solution. Zio shook his head. Nothing useful like magic weapons or wings. Tio rubbed his hand over his face, hit with a fresh wave of exhaustion. What was he going to do? He had barely been able to help keep himself alive in the first trial, so how was he going to help Zio? The odds were not in his favor. It was like Zio was set up for failure.